So here was the plan for today. All right. Rewind to Tuesday, to yesterday. Cover Pitt spring practice in the morning. Go to the first practice of the spring, come home, work a little bit, Pitt basketball game at 2 o'clock, tape this Morning Pitt right here. In that window between getting home from practice and the start of the Pitt basketball game, and tape it and just talk about spring camp. Just talk about spring camp. We were doing a post-game show after the basketball game anyway. We knew we would talk about basketball then, so you'd have some, here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and on the podcast and everything, you would have some Pitt basketball content. So, we would do that. And you could get your basketball fill there, and we could make the Morning Pitt about spring camp, talk about practice observations and things that stood out and everything like that. That was the plan. And then we'd be able to get done with that before the basketball game started, watch the basketball game, do the post-game show, coverage, and all those things. Jim's down there in Charlotte providing great content from the game. And then we can move on. We wouldn't have to worry about doing the Morning Pitt later because it would already be done. And then we would have the basketball stuff throughout the, basketball stuff coming from the post-game show. It's a good plan, right? Well, at some point between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock yesterday, which is when I would have taped today's Morning Pitt, I started thinking about it. I thought, maybe should just hold off in case there's something that happens in this game, in this ACC tournament game against Notre Dame, that might merit talking about it here on the Morning Pitt. And I mean, win or lose, it would merit being talked about. But you never know when something extraordinary is going to happen, and it would be awkward if you didn't talk about it on the Morning Pitt. So I said, well, maybe I should hold off. Maybe I should wait, do the post-game show like we were always planning on doing, and hold off on the Morning Pitt until, after the game, just to see if there's anything that we really want to emphasize or hammer on. Maybe we could do part basketball, part spring camp, something like that for the Wednesday Morning Pitt. So I held off, and we waited until after the game. And I got to tell you, I'm glad we held off, because if I had recorded the Morning Pitt yesterday talking about spring football, it would have been wasted, because I would have had to throw that in the can and tape a whole new one because of how yesterday's game ended. And in one of the most common refrains, what we'll say over and over again, what we said over and over again on the post-game show, is that you have to understand. Okay? Pitt put themselves in a position to lose that game on a foul called with 0.5 seconds left. Pitt put themselves in that position. And no matter how much we want to complain about the foul call, as we should, it doesn't take away from how poorly Pitt played and the complaints that should be lodged against that team. Lodged, filed, issued, uttered. It doesn't take away from any of that. This is one of those classic two things can be true situations. One, Pitt did not play well enough to win that game. Pitt didn't deserve to win that game. Notre Dame didn't either, but Pitt did not deserve to win that game because for 39 minutes and 59.5 seconds, they did not play well enough to win. That's true. Also true, that was a terrible call. A brutally bad call on the foul on Zach Austin. It never should have been called in any situation. I think it was a ticky-tacky foul, a touch foul to begin with that you shouldn't call no matter at any point in the game. And you absolutely should not call that with 0.5 seconds left in a tied tournament elimination game. And I mean, I'm not quite as hardcore as some people. Well, if it's a foul at this time, it should be a foul at any time. You can't adjust your calls based on the situation in the game. Well, you definitely cannot call that foul in that situation. I don't even think Zach Austin put himself in a bad position. It's not even like he took an unnecessary risk or hacked to the ball. He was going up for a rebound. His arm went straight up. It might have linked a little bit with Tay Davis's arm, but he was going up for the rebound. It wasn't even that hard of a foul. And it wasn't a bad decision by Austin or an unnecessary risk or anything like that. It was a ticky-tacky foul in a game where that wasn't really the case for most of the game. They weren't calling things like that for most of the game. There were 24 total fouls called in that game, 12 on each team. And that includes Austin's foul at the end, and that includes the technical foul on Tay Davis. So you take those two out, you have up until that point 11 flow of play fouls. And actually that includes a flagrant foul too on Cam Corrin. which they called because they had to call because he threw an elbow in the guy's face. But my point is that there just weren't that many fouls called. 24 fouls, 12 on each team. They barely got into the bonus in the second half. I forget if either team got into the bonus in the first half. Notre Dame only had 5 fouls in the first half. Pitt had 4 fouls in the first half. So neither team got into the bonus in the first half. They only got into the bonus in the second half. There were a total of 19 free throws attempted. It just wasn't a game with a lot of fouls being called, and I'm good with that. That's great. I think that's a good way to go. Don't call a lot of fouls. Let them play. It was a physical game. It was fun to watch. Jim Boeheim probably appreciated it because it was like an old Big East game. They let them play. They let them be physical. And they set that tone from the start. There wasn't the flagrant fouls, the free throws from the flagrant foul were like 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes and 21 seconds into the game. But the first shooting fouls weren't until 6.5 minutes into the game. Brandon Cummings attempted 2 at 13:25. And so they just weren't calling it. They were letting guys play, and they established that tone from the start. They stuck with it throughout. There was never a point where it felt like it really shifted. I think the refs were consistent, calling both teams the same way and calling it the same way all the way through the game up until the final 0.5 seconds when they call that ticky-tacky touch foul on Zach Austin to decide the game. They decide to call something, and they do it in the most crucial moment of the game. A brutally bad call that decided a game that shouldn't have been decided on that. Now, we've got that out of the way. We've complained about the officiating. We've talked about the call. We don't need to talk about it anymore. Because the reality, I said 2 things can be true. We just talked a lot about how the second thing could be true. Because the first thing, and it's probably the more important thing, is that Pitt did not play well enough to win this game. Notre Dame didn't either, but Pitt didn't. And so when you talk about complaining, some of it rings a little hollow when with 19.2 seconds left, Jalen Lowe is dribbling along the baseline and he steps out of bounds. With 2 minutes and about 8 seconds left, Lowe takes I think a ill-advised drive, and Cam Corrin ends up getting his 3rd foul out of it. Just under 35 seconds or so, Lowe tried this up and under scoop thing that on TV they said that Jeff Capel was encouraging Jalen Lowe, telling him afterwards it was a good shot, keep doing that. But it was a bad shot, and the ball went out on Notre Dame, and it got reviewed, and I think it appropriately went out on Notre Dame. But, another missed opportunity there. Cam Corrin had an and one that he missed the free throw on. I thought there was something else that was particularly bad. But I think as you looked throughout the game, there were plenty of opportunities where Pitt could have won this game. There are plenty of opportunities where Pitt could have played well enough to win this game. There are plenty of opportunities where Pitt could have put itself in a position to not be stuck in a tie game with 0.5 seconds left. And Zach Austin, who ended up getting the foul called on him, very unfortunate situation for him, missed 2 pretty easy dunks. I mean, I don't mean to say that any dunk is easy. It takes, plus level athleticism, elite level athleticism. You have to be a special human being. You know what I mean? You have to be a real specimen to be able to dunk a basketball, to be able to convert the alley-oop that he tried to convert and failed on. You have to be a pretty unique individual to be able to finish the fast break dunk that he attempted and clanged off the rim. You have to be a special individual, a special kind of athlete in order to make those plays. So I don't mean to say that they're easy, but for him, they should be. For him, those are the kind of plays he needs to make. And for him to miss on both of those, that's 4 points. That's 4 points in a game that you were tied. And so add in Zach Austin's 4 points from the 2 dunks he should have made, and you find yourself, instead of 54-54 with a foul called with 0.5 seconds, it's 58-54 with a foul called with 0.5 seconds. Now that foul doesn't matter. Now that ref call doesn't change the game. It doesn't decide the game. But because you missed those dunks, because Corrin missed his free throw, because Jalen Lowe had those questionable shots, because Ishmael Leggett had a bad game, all of these things compounded to allow the game to be decided in that final second. Pitt created the situation where the refs were able to decide the game. The refs should not decide the game, but Pitt should have never given them the opportunity to do so. In the second half, Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett shot 3 of 14. The rest of the team shot 10 of 16. These are Pitt's two best players. And they've also been more or less directly responsible for a number of Pitt's losses. Not entirely responsible, but pretty directly responsible. And it's disappointing. And you know, those guys take it upon themselves. They try to carry the team. They try to lead the team. They try to make the plays that the team needs. And I think that's what Jeff Capel wants them to do, is what Jim Boeheim wanted them to do. He talked about it nonstop throughout the first half. Pitt's guards have to take over. Pitt's guards have to lead this game. Pitt's guards have to make the impact and all this stuff. And so I think that's how the coaches look at it. They want their best players to lead the team. But last night or yesterday afternoon and countless other times over the course of the 31 games that led into yesterday, Lowe and Leggett weren't making the plays that needed to be made. There's a lot of reasons for that, and it's not all entirely on those two guys. The game changes with certain factors that are outside of those two guys. Which center is on the court? Are there two centers on the court? Is Damian Dunn available? Is Brandon Cummings playing? Is Amsal Delilich playing? Is Zach Austin playing? All of these, is Jorge Diaz-Graham playing? All of these factors affect what Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett are able to do. And they haven't always been put in the best position to positively impact the game. We were talking on the post-game show last night about Zach Austin. And I think Zach Austin is a really good, maybe even great complementary player. Complementary. Not a primary guy. And this may have been, for all of the flaws in this two-center lineup that Pitt used all season long, that they started for 25 out of 32 games, for all the flaws in it, and there are many, one that we probably haven't talked as much about because we focused so much on comparing Cam Corrin and Guillermo Diaz-Graham, but one of the sort of ancillary flaws is that putting those two together resulted in having two primary players and three complementary guys on the court at all times. I don't think you ever want your complementary players to outnumber your primary players, if you can avoid it. And by having Lowe, Leggett, Austin, Guillermo, and Corrin, you have two ball handlers and the two guards, and then three complementary guys. And I just think that made things that much more difficult. It was that much easier to defend Pitt because you could focus on Lowe and you could focus on Leggett and you could force them into difficult shots. Every time Lowe drove yesterday, there were two guys on him for Notre Dame. Always. He ended up dribbling along the baseline. I'm surprised he only stepped out on the baseline once, to be honest, because he ended up dribbling along the baseline multiple times because Notre Dame forced him there. He had no other path. Well, that gets a little bit tougher to do when you have three guards on the court, when you have three ball handlers on the court. And maybe that was the goal. Maybe that was the goal all along, was to play with Lowe, Leggett, Damian Dunn, Austin or Guillermo, and Cam Corrin. The best lineup, I think, would probably be Austin at the 4 and Guillermo or Corrin. Personally prefer Guillermo, although Cam Corrin had a pretty good second half yesterday. He was 5 of 5. He scored 10 points, missed his free throw, but he had 4 rebounds and all of them were on offense. That's pretty good. I think he was like +5 in the second half or something. Since we talked so much about the plus minus after the Boston College game where Guillermo was +30 and Cam Corrin was only +1, I think it's worth pointing out that in the second half yesterday, Pitt was +5 with Cam Corrin on the court. He played well in the second half. He didn't play well in the first half. He wasn't very good in the first half. But in the second half, he played pretty well. But I digress. I don't know if Lowe and Leggett were always put in the best position to succeed this season, with who was on the court with them and what they were asked to do and what they were trying to do. I don't think those guys were always given the best chance and the best opportunity. And that kind of comes back to a big topic that is going to be one we talk about all offseason, and hopefully we get a chance to talk to Jeff Capel about. And it's about mentality. It's about approach. It's about philosophy. It's about taking a different look or taking a long, hard look about whether a different approach is needed. For Jeff Capel, this offseason has to be about asking a few questions of himself, first and foremost, and then his staff and his players. Number one, how did this team fall so short of its expectations? And I think the expectations within the program were just as high as they were outside the program, if not higher. And yet they obviously fell really, really short of those expectations. Why? What happened? What were the key decisions that were made? And I think if Jeff Capel, like every mirror in his house, there should be a Post-it note stapled to it. You can't staple to a mirror, but stuck to it that says, "Don't blame the Dunn injury." So that everywhere Jeff Capel goes, every time he looks in the mirror, he sees a sign that says, "Don't blame the Dunn injury." He needs to put that out of his mind. Yes, Damian Dunn was expected to be a big part of this team. Damian Dunn was expected to play a primary role, and he was going to be, it was important. He was one of the top two, he was one of the main two off-season additions. And so he was going to play a big role. And his injury changed it up. It changed what their plans were. It changed what their expectations were, or how they were going to approach things. But you can't use that as an excuse, because it's not just that. And you can't let it just be that. Because if you just settle back and say, well, if we didn't lose Dame, we probably would have done a much better. If you do that, you lose sight of the real goal, which is identifying the things you can change. Because if you just allow that to be your excuse for the season, you're not going to fix anything. You're not going to change anything. You're not going to do anything differently. And I think this staff needs to have a very eye-opening road to Damascus moment. They really do. About what they've done, what has worked here over the past 7 years, but really the last 3. What has worked over the last 3? What has not worked over the last 3 years? And how can they take what has worked and emphasize it, develop it, and grow it to get this team to reach its potential, to get this program to reach its potential? And so Jeff Capel has to sit back, and the first question has to be, why did this team fall so short of the expectations? And again, don't use the Dunn injury as an excuse. And then he needs to ask himself, what are we doing with the center position? And this is with any luck, this will be tied into his answer to question number 1. But he needs to ask himself, what are we doing with the center position? What do we want to do with the center position? What can we realistically do? And what do we need in order to help us win? Because for 2 years, we won a lot. We made the NCAA tournament. We were the poster child for teams that got screwed by the NCAA selection committee last year. And we did that with a certain type of center. And we thought we would take that team and upgrade it with a different type of center. And it very much did not upgrade. It went backward. It got worse. And Jeff Capel has to recognize that. His staff has to recognize it, that the scoring you got out of Cam Corrin did not make a difference. It didn't. It didn't offset what you gave up. It didn't offset your weaknesses, the weaknesses of the center. It just didn't. And you've got to change that. I think those are probably the biggest questions facing Jeff Capel this offseason, the biggest questions he needs to answer, and the biggest things, it's crucial to next season. And as our friend Pitt Chag said on the postgame show yesterday, does Jeff Capel have that level of introspection? Can he achieve that level of introspection? He needs to. He needs to. When you have a season like this is different from those first 4 years, which all fell apart in different ways for different reasons. This is different from that. This is a team that was built the way you wanted it to be built. You had a certain model in mind. You built to that model, and it crashed and burned in spectacular fashion for one of the most disappointing Pitt basketball seasons in memory, at least of this century. And why? Why did it fall so short? That's the question Capel has to ask himself. And it can't be about Damian Dunn's injury. It can't be about a foul in the final 0.5 seconds. It can't be about any of that. It's about how the roster was built, how it was deployed, and what was intended to be accomplished with this roster, and how some of those goals might have been misguided. And I think you and I can look at it and see certain things. Jeff Capel needs to look at it from the inside and see those things himself and adjust his approach accordingly. Whether he does or doesn't, it's going to go a long way toward determining what kind of success Pitt has next year. All right. We will talk football tomorrow. It's second day of spring camp tomorrow morning, so we'll have all the kinds of coverage there. We got spring camp video from practice yesterday, so make sure you check that out. And, of course, we have the live Panther-Lair show tonight. I forget if Jim will be back from Charlotte or not, so it might just be me solo, but we'll see. Tune in tonight at 8:30, and you'll find out. You can see if one face is there or two faces, although we always bring Jim in late. So, maybe I'll surprise you. Maybe he'll show up midway through the show. But either way, like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you never miss any of our Pitt video content. And of course, go check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, on the 24/7 Sports Network, where the message boards are buzzing. People have a lot to say about Pitt basketball. People have a lot to say about Pitt football. People have a lot to say about recruiting. There's everything going on. Oh, we've got our mailbag is going to be coming up too. You want to post your questions for the Friday mailbag? We'd love it if you could. All right, thanks for tuning in today. I hope you had a good Tuesday yesterday after the Pitt basketball game. I hope you enjoy your Wednesday. We'll catch up with you tonight for the live show and this tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.